Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna drink till the day that I die.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I shall be covering the topic of no boil all grain brewing. I will also share my brew and recipe of my all grain no boil Saison. If you go back into history, then the style of Saison was a beer that was never boiled. Well, you know, at one point it wasn't even pasteurized. Consequently, these beers never really had a very long shelf life. Then, the very handy technique of pasteurization came along. Pasteurization was originally used as a way of preventing wine and beer from souring. An Englishman by the name of Peter Durrant, who was a British inventor and merchant, used pasteurization to preserve his beer and wine. A little later on, he invented the tin can and used pasteurization in many different food and liquid products. For many years that followed, pasteurization was the technique used to actually purify beer. And then once hops were used more and more, we found that hop utilization was far better when you actually boiled them. Hence why these days we're still boiling our beer. So this begs the question, should we really be doing no boil brewing? Are there problems associated with it? Let's look into this a little bit more now. Generally most brewers, the first thing they will say about a no boil situation is, oh my god, you have to boil, it drives off DMS. And this is certainly true, and this is why a lot of Pilsner Malt based brewers are actually boiled for 90 minutes. The thing that they're actually missing though is that DMS doesn't form until the wort reaches 80 to 82 degrees Celsius. So as long as your wort doesn't reach this temperature, you're good to go. The next argument that people will make is that hops need to be boiled. It's fair to say that this is incorrect. What is correct though is that you will get more from your hops if you boil them. Hops can certainly be added to your mash, but do not expect the high IBUs that you'll get from boiling hops. It certainly wouldn't be cost effective to use this method to make high bitterness IPAs, for example, but for Belgian farmhouse styles where 10 to 15 IBU is okay, this is an ideal method. You will of course need to use more hops than normal though to get those sorts of IBU levels. The other thing that people might be concerned about is that a no boil brew will lead to a sour beer. Of course that might suit some people, but it may not suit others. It's fair to say that lacto will be killed off during mash out. Some strains, however, actually form spores that will protect them at even higher temperatures. So really a fast attenuating yeast and get it turned around quickly will certainly help combat that. The other thing that people will ask about is, will having no boil give a cloudy beer? Well, certainly there is some truth to this. You should expect some level of cloudiness in this type of brew, and this is something to accept. With no proper break formation, you're going to get some haze. But hey, it's not really a huge deal. I mean, we deal with cloudiness in wheat beers, no problem. Some people may also be concerned that a no boil beer may not be fit for consumption. This is certainly not true. You will be pasteurizing your wort during the mashing process. Keep in mind that milk is actually pasteurized at 72 degrees C or 161 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's kept at this temperature for a very short time, usually up to about 15 seconds. So if you mash out at the usual mash out temperatures and you do this for 10 minutes, you've definitely got it covered. You might also be further reassured to know that pasteurization can actually occur at much lower temperatures still. Pasteurization can happen in just 30 minutes at 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 degrees C. So hopefully this has given you some level of reassurance and also information about what to expect. So now I will share with you the recipe for what I'm brewing now, and then we'll move straight on to the brew. So here's a quick look at the recipe. I will be going through this when I demonstrate the brew later on. and all of this information is repeated in the YouTube video description. For all intensive purposes, this is a pretty standard Saison. If you look at the two mash steps here, you will note that we're basically pasteurizing this brew 3 times in effect. One thing you will note though is the amount of hops that we're needing to use to get that IBU. Yes, it is a fair bit more, but hey, what you're getting out of it is a very old traditional brew and an experiment that you can use for a no boil, which makes for a much quicker brew day. Okay, so first things first, what we need to do is use some Saison or equivalent to sanitize our counterflow chiller. This is naturally because we're not going to be boiling our wort on this particular brew, but we still need to have a sanitary counterflow chiller. There is absolutely no reason to increase the temperature of your Saison, so no need to put any of the heating elements on. I would suggest adding between 7.5 to 10 litres of your sanitizer into the Grainfather. Naturally the Grainfather would be cleaned from your last clean up from your last brew. Then just switch your pump on and let it recirculate the Saison through the counterflow chiller for some minutes. That will do the job nicely. Personally, I prefer Saison out of the products on the market, and one thing that's very nice about it is you can actually use it more than a few times. So what I'm doing next is using the pump to put it back into my container for future use. Okay, so let's mash in, and you can see here that I have my usual fairly fine grain crush. I would certainly recommend that you take this mashing in process very slowly, making sure that every grain is wet, and introduce the grain gradually and stir in between. This way you'll make sure that all of the efficiency that is possible will be brought out of that grain. One important thing to mention is that I noticed when I tried to use the Grainfather apps for a no boil brew that there were complete incompatibilities. I have spoken to iMake about this, and it's something that they're looking into for the future. So what I've done with the information of this recipe is I've included figures that I don't usually, and these are to do with the strike and sparge water volumes that I will recommend. Do keep in mind though that different malts have different water absorption rates and so on, so my figures may not be the experience that you find, but it really is as easy as this. Mash in the normal way that you would. If you notice that you need a bit more water, then simply add it. If you follow the exact same volume that I'm brewing here, then I would suggest you start with just under 11 litres of strike water. Once you've done your mashing, then lift the grain basket up as normal as if you're going to sparge, and have a look at the amount of volume you have. Do keep in mind that you need to have just over 10 litres to obtain 10 litres. So aim for something closer to 11 and you shouldn't go far wrong. Naturally that's the amount of wort that you want to collect after you've done your sparge. One thing you will need to remember, which is fairly unusual, is that you'll be adding your hops during the mash. So once all of your grain and your hops are now added, it's business as usual in terms of putting on the top plate and all of the accessories on top of that. Another thing that I add is a simple stink strainer, which basically filters out some of the loose pieces of grain that are inevitable with the sort of grain crush that I like to have. After that, obviously we need to start putting in our mash steps into the controller individually, or at least until no boil support is added to the system. I've gone for a very middle of the rows type mashing schedule for this one. But if you're looking for a beer which has a light body or a heavy body, you may wish to alter this. Also, if you want to make this one a bit more alcohol, then of course you can add some more grain and increase the alcohol content that way. Or what you can do is start stopping the mash midway and give it a good stir and gain extra efficiency in that method also. I certainly wouldn't advise going too high on this one because the alcohol content is already knocking on the door of 8%, and don't forget you don't have an awful lot of hop balance here. Okay, so the mash is now done and we're at the pre-sparge point. My advice at this stage to you would be, in contrary to what we usually do where we actually start sparging fairly early, we don't let a lot of the water drain out, I would actually do the opposite here. Certainly I would advise against letting it drain dry, because that could cause you a stuck sparge. But certainly you're going to want to let a fair amount of it out, just so you know exactly how much you're going to sparge with. Because of course, we're not getting really ready for a pre-boil volume now, we're getting ready for the final volume, because we're not going to boil at all. The amount that you're going to sparge with for this particular brew is not going to be very much at all. So it's important that we make all of that count and really let that process take a bit of time, let it drain out gradually and really make sure that you've washed up all of those sugars in the brew. We want to make sure that we hit at least the predicted efficiency, otherwise our numbers are just going to be all wrong. Keep in mind that because this is quite a small brew, the sparge amount is quite low anyway, and we're not sparging to bring up a volume pre-boil either, so it's even less, so certainly make it all count. So straight from the sparge, what I've done is I've used the counterflow chiller to get my wort down to the temperature that I want. I'm now putting it all into my fermenter. With a view to giving your yeast the most comfortable environment for it to start fermentation and maintain healthy progress, it's important to introduce as much air into your wort as possible. So at 75% brewhouse efficiency, I was looking for a target OG of 1.063, and you can see that I beat that by a bit here, so that's nice. You can see that we've got a pretty nice orange colour on the wort here, and by the looks of it, it looks very wit beer like, really. So all in all, a nice result all round, I believe. We'll wait for the taste test, but I have some good thoughts about how well this one went. This brew, like all of them, will be featured in a future tasting video, so certainly look out for that in the near future. So I hope you all found this very interesting and useful. I think there's certainly room for everyone to make a no-boil beer, and if they enjoy it, then I would imagine they'll definitely do it again. And I can't see any reason why you won't enjoy the result. I have found actually that some of these no-boil beers can have a little bit more flavour. There's certainly something that you should try and experience and judge for yourself. So if you did like this video, then please do go ahead and like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline for the future, so if you're interested in seeing what I've got coming up, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video or in others, or anything to do with brewing in general, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help. Until then, happy brewing!